All right, guys, I am really excited right now. We have someone that I have been looking at for a while. I literally was very excited to meet Reese one day when he's speaking on stage after he made an amazing presentation on genetics and blockchain. And what I saw there was incredible. So I'm very excited to have you, Reese, here. How's your day going so far?
Things are great.
Yeah, doing awesome, doing awesome. So you guys are in for a treat. I'm going to go ahead and share this, and I'm going to allow a couple people to come on. So we're going to give it a few seconds to allow people to come on here as we share this all over the internet, guys. Today is going to be an amazing interview. I haven't really been able, other than conversations and being on the phone a bunch of times and being wowed by Reese, I haven't been able to do an interview yet, so this is going to be really fun. I'm really going to enjoy this right now, and I know you guys are also. A lot of you guys that follow me, some people call me the digital frontiersman. Reese is also like an innovative technologist that is doing amazing things out in the world, and I'm going to give you guys a little peek of what he's up to, and I'm going to allow Reese to give a little take of who he is, right? So as I share this out to you guys, here we go. Share now, and let's get this rocking. Okay, so very interesting episode for you guys today. So Reese Jones is a serial entrepreneur and investor. He is the associate founder to one of the most revolutionary universities on the planet, which is Singularity University. Okay, if you guys don't know about Singularity University, it's in Silicon Valley, San Francisco area, and they are doing some of the most advanced stuff when it comes to leadership, the way of thinking, and business in general, and some of the top minds in the world are going to this university. So we have one of the guys that helped create this university here with us. He has actually been the founder CEO of a bunch of different type of companies, and what I like to call him is actually a polymath, guys. There's not a lot of good polymaths out there. There's not a lot of them out there in general. If we go back in history, you're going to look at Leonardo da Vinci, Benjamin Franklin, okay? Thomas Edison. These guys were polymaths, and they were experts in many different fields. And Reese has an expertise level on many different subjects, which is going to be very interesting to tap on. He has been part of over 40 merger and acquisitions, including 2 IPOs. He sat on the board of over 10 startups, and basically helped with the liquidity of over $2 billion, guys. Okay, so he knows the world of acquisitions, mergers, starting companies, buying other companies, being acquired by another company. And he has done stuff in all kinds of fields, and is definitely a thought leader when it comes to IoT, DLT, mobile technology, robotics, synthetic biology. I mean, Reese is in all kinds of stuff, and I'm just very excited to be here. So I thank you so much, Reese, for coming on. And do us a favor and give us a little background. With so much that you do, give us a little background of how you got started, and how this evolution to who you are today has gone.
Well, I started out in academia in biophysics, and I was working on brain imaging technology to look at what's wrong in the brains of people with schizophrenia or Alzheimer's disease using PET and MRI imaging. And that was what I was planning to do, sort of academic medical brain research. And my hobby at the time was phone hacking. And so I was very curious about how the global phone network worked, and because it was sort of like a giant brain that you hacked from the outside to try and figure out what was going on inside. And in the early days of phone hacking, there were people who, one person in particular, a blind person who had perfect pitch, who could both hear a sound and whistle the same sound. And if in a phone dialing sequence, if you whistle into the phone at just the right moment, at the right frequency, you can turn the network into maintenance mode and make free phone calls.
Wow.
Kind of a thing at the time. And then the phone company wised up to that and made it multiple tones. And so the early days when I was a teenager actually was the Homebrew Computer Club, where a good portion of the people who went to the homebrew computer club in Silicon Valley, sort of a do-it-yourself club, were actually phone hackers. And some of the early products discussed were what they call blue boxes, which is a box you could make yourself that would make the tones to go in the phone. And actually, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, their first product together was actually a blue box before the Apple I. And it was for the homebrew club. And this is, the hobbyists getting together to figure out something complicated for fun and so forth. And so I learned a lot about phones and how networks work and so forth. And so while I was in academia, I also was inventing things. And I had a problem, which was how to hook the computers in my house together and to the printers in a sort of an old house that had electrical problems. And so I had to figure out a way to hook the different things in different rooms together. And I ended up using phone parts to do it, where at the time computer networks were done with kind of TV type wire, a triaxial cable, in fact, and in a straight line, where phones run in a star topology and they're ordinary phone wires. And so I just put the computer networks on the phone wires, which you weren't supposed to do if you studied engineering, but I didn't study engineering, I studied physics. And so there was no reason why you couldn't do that in physics. It's just people were taught not to do that in engineering.
Isn't it funny, Reese, how sometimes you need an outside mind that comes from a complete different industry to come and disrupt like what an industry is doing, right? That's kind of how I feel like that was right there.
Yeah, well, they say ignorance is bliss, but also ignorance is creativity. So.
Yes.
And so I ended up making kits like in the homebrew style, but for something called BMUG at Berkeley, that people would solder together themselves the parts that I would get at Radio Shack and put in plastic baggies. And so it was more of a hacker thing for do-it-yourself types. And what happened is companies started coming saying, we like these designs and these products, and we want we don't want kits, we want them pre-assembled. And I go, oh, we can get some students and we'll assemble them and do that. And they said, well, we want like 1,000 of them. And I go, well, that'll take a while. And they go, no, we want 1,000 every week. And then multiple companies, asked for the same thing. And so I started kind of a side thing to make these networking products. And that turned into kind of a major thing, in that those designs evolved into basically that blue wire that you plug Ethernet into your computer with is now the current version of that technology.
Wow.
So it's used by billions of people all over the world. And it took a decade for it to become a widely recognized standard, but it is now.
Wow.
And then at some point this business activity was making more money per month than my professor advisors were making per year. And I asked, well, what should I do? And they said, well, young man, if I were you, I would take a leave of absence. And so that's what I did for the university.
So that was during university that you were doing this? Yeah. Wow. Whoa. Okay. And then what year was this? And did you literally just like, okay, you know what, this is what I'm going to do now? And then you just took off from school and started going into the entrepreneurship route?
Well, I was doing both for several years. And so I was doing research at Lawrence Berkeley Labs and academic stuff at Berkeley, and at the same time growing this business that started in my house and grew to where we had nearly 20 phone lines coming into a residential house to run the business, and it became obvious that it needed to be a real thing, and so we moved to a real office and grew from there.
Yeah.
And
So tell us about like the curiosity, right? So you were starting basically into the entrepreneurship route, kind of almost by accident, I would say. It was a little bit by accident, right? You didn't even really go out there, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to make this into a business. It just fell into your lap as a possibility and an opportunity. You know, what got you into the next phase? Like, where did you go after this next like wave where you actually started making money, turning this into the business?
Well, I was just solving a problem that I had, and turns out lots of people had the problem, which is how do you connect all the computers together? And so that's and first, how do you do them in a room, then in a building, then the floors of a building, then all the buildings on a campus together, then all the campuses together, like cities, which is basically building the internet. And so the plumbing for building the internet, that is, each device, how do you attach it, and then how do you hook them all together, and then how do you organize the traffic? And the thing about phones is phones also carry sound, and so what we were doing was running data on the phone wires, but sound was also coming on those same phone wires, and so we did the first products to put sound in the computers and sound over the internet. And that, and so combining voice and data into one system that we're using sort of a derivative of that now in this video call, where the video and the audio is analog on either end and digital in between. And you have to break it into little pieces and compress it and send it over the network and reassemble it in the right order and decompress it. And so that's kind of the early products of voice and data networking that has become first the wired internet, and then the mobile internet as that went wireless. So the progression of the business was doing the next logical thing, or the next right thing. Like first connecting the computers on one floor, then how do all the floors connect together, then the buildings. And there's requiring increasingly complicated products to solve those problems.
Wow, that's amazing. One of the things that's beautiful about that is that, in the very beginning stages that you were able to take part, because it was really just a necessity for yourself, and you probably didn't realize how many people out in the world were possibly going to use this technology at some point, and everything like that. So I would say that you are innovating from a very young age. If we take you back a little bit further, let's take you back to like years 10 to 15. Okay, let's just say around this age. So this is a curiosity question. Were you building anything? What were you doing? Like, who was Reese Jones around like 8 to 16 years old? Like, who was he? Like, what was he up to?
Well, one of my main hobbies also at that time was sailing and sailboat racing, and I love the complexity of sailboats and the variability of the wind in the water, and that there's a lot of moving parts, and all of them could break, and the weather would determine how it went, and so it was both complicated and unpredictable, and so I kind of liked that. And my first paying job, my dad's professor in a med school in San Francisco, and his research is on drugs that affect the brain, like psychedelics and other sorts of things. And so I would hang around his lab where they were doing research quite a bit. And my first job was a research study they were doing in the med school, where they took the whole auditorium for the med school, about 300 people fit there, and they all got marijuana cigarettes to smoke, and we had 1,000 Baskin-Robbins milkshakes, and so experiment was to see whether marijuana causes the munchies, of course. And my job as a 10-year-old kid was to take if they had 2 milkshakes and a third, I was supposed to measure, well, was it third or half or what was it? And so it's not a typical first job.
Wow, that's interesting. You know what? It's funny as you're telling me these stories, you getting into physics and then you being interested in the field of like medicinal, I think some of the stuff in genomics and stuff like that. Like it goes, see how sometimes these things at a young age really make us who we are. So that's a very interesting story right there. As you got further, like, tell me a little bit about, I know you've worked with in the past with like Stephen Kotler and some people you've worked with people in the area of when it comes to biology. This is like a field that you do. When I heard your whole entire speech on blockchain technology and genetics, like what took you down that path to get into that field and learning possibly about the brain and how the brain works and possibly how like psychedelics work? Can you share any of that information?
Well, so I started out for both undergrad and grad school in biophysics, which is combining kind of the principles of physics and discipline of physics to biology, which are sort of complex, wet, and messy systems. And so that combination is both deterministic, like computers and math, and predictable, and then non-deterministic, like biology and how people behave and how chemistry works. And so combining those two together to explain how life is working and how the brain and the mind are working, and also when they're not working, like in mental health things. And so using technologies that heavily based on physics to study and understand what's happening in biology, which is unpredictable, and using sort of complexity theory and information theory to try and figure out what's going on in a more predictable way. And so it's kind of a combination of many different disciplines applied to answering certain particular problems that people have that are important. And so that is what I started out in, and it's kind of been information theory and complexity and these kind of things. Networks have been something that's been an interest of mine my whole life, and there's many ways you can apply those to business and entrepreneurship and invention in particular. In that one of the most useful things in invention is to look at how biology does it and then just try and do that with technology. So copying biology with technology, and that could be chemically, it could be mechanically, it could be socially, it could be all kinds of different things of how do things work in biological life, and how might you design the internet to be different for that, or software, or computers, or newer kinds of technologies as well.
Yeah. So tell me about this. So one of the things that I've done a lot of reading on how the military in the past has used basically nature to create, vehicles, planes, and sometimes they're actual systems of order. And a lot of people talk about something called the Fibonacci sequence. So like as you're saying this, that's the thing that pops up for me. And when you had that talk about, genetics compared to like blockchain technology, what was that integration that you talked about? Because that's what I think about. That's like you're putting together like a nature and what is viable out there in the biological level, and then bringing it to technology. So what got you to think about that and weave it in together so well? And then what is your take maybe possibly on blockchain of the future?
Well, blockchain is basically software, of course, and it's software for doing transactions on the internet in a particular way. And so it's information flow across time, across the network. And that's so from an information theory point of view, that's the same as genetics, which is instead of ones and zeros in a computer network, it's 4 bases, ACTG of DNA, the letters of DNA, in a network of biochemistry and an ecological system with many different species. And so the code of software in digital networks is very similar to the code of information in genetics in a biological network. And so from a theory point of view, they're actually kind of the same thing. There's differences, of course, base 2 and 4 bases and so forth. But there's a lot of things you can look at in the evolution of genetics and biology and DNA and biochemistry that has been debugged for 4 billion years and has been experimented on in many, millions of different kinds of species and circumstances to get a kind of an internet of information that flows through life, through biological networks. And so how information flows in biology is somewhat similar to how information flows on the internet. And the code of how do you encode things in genes, in DNA, is similar to how you would encode things in not just internet packets, but blockchain blocks and the information of transactions and so forth. And so pulling from how information works in biology to how it works in blockchain and the internet seemed like a interesting combination to me.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. And one of the questions that I wonder, right, is that so some people, including Leonardo da Vinci, like one of the things that Leonardo da Vinci, from some of the records that we do have, is that he himself was always thinking in macrocosms and microcosms, right? So like the big system versus the little system. So my wondering is, with us going into more of a nature standpoint, let's say with blockchain platform, what do they call it? Also the network effect. Is it us tapping back into nature, or is it a natural progression that we're getting a little bit better, faster with everything, and it naturally progresses? Like, what would you say? Like, is it us? Are we that smart that we're realizing that nature is the best teacher? Or is it that, it's just happening, nature is automatically pushing in that direction?
Well, Kevin Kelly, a writer that I like, has a concept of the technology and the biology are evolving together, that they're both information systems that are increasing in complexity over time, exponentially over time. And so biology is getting more complex, and so is the internet. And that these are evolving by natural selection and that it's not humans creating the information systems or information systems creating the humans. It's complexity evolving together, and so it's something that is accelerating and getting more and more complex. And so there's not a distinction necessarily between internet and biology.
Yeah, no, amazing. So one of the things that we talk about internally, actually here at Pitch Investors Live, like me and Matthew have had a lot of conversations about this one subject, is that we believe that things are speeding up extremely fast, right? So it's a fundamental difference from what used to be. And one of the concepts that I think came out of, it originally came from someone before. We know Ray Kurzweil talks about it. This is talked a lot about in Singularity University, which is the law of accelerating returns, right? So years ago, if you go back in time, a $1 billion company used to take decades, if not a century to be created, right? As we go further into the future, one of the latest companies to get $1 billion valuation was Bird, and I believe it was around 6 months. So there's a belief that we have here, and what we're doing at Pitch is basically breaking down the walls to get people in front of investors faster, get in front of potential advisors, people that could help them out, getting exposure in a very fast and systematic way. And that's why we have an app instead of doing it on all these different platforms that are a lot slower. So what's your belief, and what about the law of accelerating returns? Like, what do you see? Do you see the world speeding up? Like, you being an innovator, technologist, very future thinking, what's your take on what's happening right now in the world, and where is it that we're heading?
Well, things are definitely accelerating, and Ray Kurzweil talks about sort of the law of accelerating returns, as he describes it, that it's exponentially changing technical complexity. And so a common example that he uses is Moore's law, which is the complexity of a computer chip basically doubling every 18 months. Or a practical example of phones that they get approximately twice as good every year. And that's an accelerating technology. And how do you recognize something that's exponentially accelerating compared to something that's not? And so phones, as an example, are something that gets twice as good every year, but a backhoe digging a trench is about the same speed as it was 30 or 50 years ago. And so if you're going to build a business, and if you're building it using technologies that don't change much, then for the business to grow, you have to do the hard work of growing it. Where if you build the business around a technology that naturally gets better at an exponential pace and using that technology to solve a problem, then your solution to the problem gets twice as good every year without extra work, because you're using a tool that gets better and better. And so if the tool is solving a problem, your solution gets better and better just naturally, because the technology is evolving naturally. And then you're applying it to solving a problem, and then that's the business. And Peter Diamandis says like the good way to create $1 billion business is to solve a problem for 1 billion people. And if you solve that problem using an exponentially improving technology, then not only are you solving a problem for a large number of people, but your solution gets better because the technology will naturally get better as well.
Wow, that's a great way of putting it there. I love actually the way that you put it there, because in the law of accelerating returns, for some of you that haven't heard about it, it's kind of one of the things that they talk about, including Ray, is that every single next, if you want to call it epoch, or this next level, from back in the days that, let's just say, depending on people's religious beliefs, but each paradigm shift would happen millions of years apart. Then it got down. Every time it levels up, it basically breaks in half. And then you get to the thousands of years, like a few centuries ago, we had the printing press. That was a paradigm shift. We're getting closer to today. They say that social media, the internet obviously was a paradigm shift. Social media was there. So a lot of people, including the guy that I met, he had the largest crowdfunding movie or documentary called I believe it's called The Connected Universe. Okay. And he had the same concept. He just called it in a different way. And he shows how everything's speeding up. And supposedly at the moment right now, we are in the 5-year paradigm shift. So supposedly on the next gap and the next level that we get to, it gets to 2.5 years, then it gets to 1.25, then it gets to 6 months and change. So we're actually living in an age of where we could have paradigm shifts and revolutionary technologies like the internet, like the printing press, happen every month, every day. So what actually speeds up like this, Reese?
Nature is doing this in evolution. It's not somebody in some room somewhere deciding to do this.
Yeah.
And so either it's like being in a river, and either you swim, downstream with the river, or you swim against it. And if you go with the flow, life turns out a little easier.
The flow. All right. Awesome. I love that. So, at Pitch, I guess that's what we decided to go as a platform and everything like that. And we're trying to solve like a big problem. What was it that you saw, like when you took interest in like Pitch Investors Live, like what was of any interest to you? Like I'm going to take some people back actually really quickly and tell you guys how I met Reese. Okay. So I literally was at a conference. We actually won I think if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if this was the GC, like one of the blockchain technology ones. I believe we actually won the competition for the pitch competition, but because we had 10 minutes to pitch instead of 5, they gave the prize to the person that pitched for 5 minutes because they said it was unfair. But we won out of like 60 or 70 people. You were there. You had. This is where I got blown away. Like, I already knew who you were because I was following Singularity University, and you had that epic talk that I was blown away with. And I wanted to talk to you after it, and I was like, man, I was like, there was literally so many people crowded around you that I'm like, okay, I can't even like get near this guy. He's like untouchable right now. You know, epic talk. You know, this is when blockchain was so hot that people loved it. So luckily in the nighttime, I saw Reese and I was able to approach you. You know, just telling everyone that I was able to approach Reese, and we start off the conversation because I was like, you know what, I want to know a little bit more about Singularity University. What do you think about the future? You know, like that's where we hit it off. And then he started telling me about, you know, the investment space and, you know, being an investor, knowing it so well. And I was actually blown away that we were in a very similar field, you know, with what we do with Pitch Investors Live. So that's where, you know, we switched numbers and then we just had conversations after that. And, you know, now, Reese has actually been a great mentor to me. Amazing. Like when it comes to knowledge, information, a variety of fields, and very balanced thinker, you know, like extremely well read. You guys can also see there was a very famous pitch that someone made to Reese during our pitchathon, and it was on blockchain. And this was like really cool. I think someone shared it to like a big blockchain group, and a lot of people were talking on it and stuff like that. So just throwing that out there really quickly, because that was like really interesting how we were able to meet and everything. But what was your interest in like pitch? Like, what was it that you thought that pitch can actually do for the world? Did you have any thoughts and like anything you could share?
Well, of course, pitch runs over the internet, so there's a network effect of a community of people attached all over the world, and then attached faster. So not a blog, not a book. But more things that happen fast in real time all over the world with a network effect. So it's so not just the text, but the audio and the video and the expressions and the nuance and the a little bit of a structure to go faster and in some ways simpler that creates a network effect that has an exponential characteristic. And so the some of the traditional things of a centralized bank where people go in and fill out paperwork to apply for a loan to start their business, that is part of the process of starting a company and financing it. But a lot of that world of corporate finance is still stuck in with a lot of intermediaries. And so by using the internet and sort of technology approaches like Pitch is doing to connect the people at the ends directly together faster and easier, it sort of allows new kinds of things to emerge that maybe haven't been invented yet. But because the platform is faster and easier and more global, that it creates an environment that these new kind of things can happen. And that's what's attractive about it. You know, faster, easier, cheaper.
Yeah. One of the things that I'd like to talk about too. So people talk about this a lot. Like, how do you have something that is actually, revolutionary, as they call it? Because people use these words all the time, right? So it's a little bit cliche when someone says like, we have a revolutionary technology, or this is the next paradigm. One of the cool things I like to mention too is that when people sign up for Shark Tank, because a lot of people compare us to Shark Tank, we are not the same as Shark Tank, to make it clear. We have similarities, but we're very different. And even some people have called us like Shark Tank meets Kickstarter meets online dating. But one of the ways that we like to put it and everything like that is, check this out, Reese. I don't know if you know this statistic, but 100,000 people tried out for Shark Tank last year. Okay, 100,000 people. Now, this is actually just in the United States, I believe. They go to major cities. People line up for hours. Of course, it could be fun and everything like that. But it takes sometimes a year to two. When Kevin that's on board with us, when he was at Shark Tank, it took even longer. And only 88 people out of 100,000 people get picked. Okay, so that's less than 0.1%. There's 1,000 of what you can actually get in there, right? So one of the things that happens at Pitch, and what we've been happening is like, anyone that pays like a minimal fee is like $97. We've had our pitchathons, which we did absolutely for free. We're gonna have another one coming up, guys. We will have another one coming up. But we have our rate of people getting in front of investors is almost at 100%, and maybe it should be at 100%. So we are 2 orders of magnitude above like one of the most popular basically TV shows, and we're making it so fast that people almost instantaneously that they can get on the app, they can do it. So it's exciting to see this, and this is why I ask all these things about technology and why I was so excited to get with Pitch, and understandable you too. So we're talking about that. Let's talk about really quickly. So Pitch, after a while of being on board, we started an actual mastermind. Myself, masterminds have changed my life, right? So like 3-4 years ago, I was actually in Silicon Valley. This is not a joke. I was in Silicon Valley because I knew I wanted to move there one day. So I went for my birthday, and I made a video where it was like, I made a pact that I just want to take the biggest moves, want to give the best type of mentorship, and, put myself in those circles. And it was done in Silicon Valley, right? So I know that there's power in proximity, okay? So when there's power in proximity, just like these masterminds, being in like elaborate groups, but very intimate locations and stuff, you're in the heart of Silicon Valley, right? So you're literally in the heart. When I went to visit you in SF, like you took me like to the very heart of all these giant mega companies and technology. So you've been there, I think, all your life. So tell us a little bit more about the power of you being in Silicon Valley, or these tight-knit groups of these forward-thinking visionaries and, people in technology. Like, what's the benefit and what do you get out of that being in this environment?
Well, when you grow up in an environment, you don't really appreciate the difference of that compared to other places. and so there's, in Silicon Valley, there's long been, for more than 100 years, a culture of welcoming new ideas and experiments and different ways to think about things, different ways to do things. And that's from the gold rush days to, to computer chips and software and social networks and biology biotech are all things that have been kind of welcomed here. And the importance of mentorship, like if you grow up in a place, you end up meeting people that are characteristic of that place. So I, was neighbors with investment bankers and venture capitalists and tech CEOs and entrepreneurs who had succeeded, and they sort of helped me along with understanding how this all works. In the same way as academic advisors, are experienced in the field you're interested in, and that they help you figure out what you want to do in life. And so Silicon Valley is kind of like a big university for entrepreneurship and invention and innovation and risk-taking, but not crazy risk-taking, calculated risk-taking. And so that's an environment. But it, as a kid, I started doing investing early because that's, of course, what people should do. And my first two private company investments that a mentor helped me get into, it was Apple and Genentech. And so that got me addicted to good returns, right?
Wow, very nice. I didn't know about the Apple. I had no idea about that. That's incredible. Damien on our team, he was right there in Silicon Valley for Apple for a long time. And he gave up basically for entrepreneurship and, to help entrepreneurs. He gave up, an amazing paying job at Apple and everything, to come on board, and also here at Pitch now. So it's amazing. Super awesome.
Well, there's kind of a thing in Silicon Valley where the superstars in big companies, very often the big company can't justify paying them enough for their superstardom. And so there's almost a system where they're encouraged to go off and be an entrepreneur, start a company, use outside investment to grow the company. And if the original company likes it, they acquire it. And the entrepreneur gets a lot of money for that transaction at a low tax rate. And so it's a way to, go around the system of a big company, internal invention, and encourage sort of side projects that maybe get reacquired or maybe not. And it's actually lower risk for the company, because if their startup's not working out the way they like, they don't buy it. And so it's kind of a system where to build a big company, you pretty much have to do it by buying lots of little companies. So Silicon Valley is like a marketplace for that, where less than 2% of companies ever make it to the stage of going public by themselves, and even after they do, they often get acquired. And where most companies, their fate is either they fail or they succeed, and the outcome is somebody acquires that company or that business. And so that's the most likely outcome. So that's something people should plan for when they're starting a company, is that you're building a product that solves a problem for a customer. That's one design principle. The other is you're also building a company that needs to be attractive to investors and attractive to acquirers for it to have a good outcome.
Oh yeah, no, awesome. That one of the subjects that Reese, you're going to be talking about in our mastermind, which I thought was really awesome, because like I was thinking of like different subject lines, right? I was thinking of different subject lines that we could use, So like one of the things I love about when I have conversations with you, Reese, is that you think big, right? So you think big. Like when we're talking about stuff, we're not talking about like, hey, let's grow this to, $20, $50 million company, 100 million. You like to do things the right way. So that's something that I took in a lot from you, Reese, in the last, about year and change that maybe we've like met, probably somewhere around there. And you like to think in the way of Facebook or Apple and everything like that. So one of the subjects that you're going to talk about is like, how to get a company funded, how to acquire other companies. Because when I was talking about acquisition, I was like, okay, you should definitely talk about acquisitions or how to get acquired, I said. And you're like, no. It's not how to get acquired. It's how to acquire and get acquired. You told me there's a big difference. So what is it about that mindset that you need to have when you're trying to build something really big, right? You're trying to build something really big, and give us a quick snippet of what you're going to talk about, at the mastermind, just a quick snippet of like what it takes for someone to think at that level, and to build something monumental the way that you think. What is a quick snippet of information that someone needs to know about getting funded, possibly acquiring other companies, and getting acquired?
Well, so so when you're planning a company, one way to think about it is, well, if I'm making a donut shop, how many people are close by to buy these donuts? And that's kind of the scale of how big you can grow. And if you think about, well, there's 7 billion people on Earth, and they all have certain common needs, that if you're going to build a company that solves a problem that people have, well, then how would you do that for everybody? So, all 7 billion people and everywhere on Earth, you think about it differently than, oh, well, we'll just do this part manually, or we'll just not think about that kind of scale. And so if you've thought about that scale, at least when you're planning the company, then you have built a good foundation for, if it's working, then the foundation is strong enough to hold a larger structure. And so if you have a weak foundation, then you can build a big company, but it'll often fall apart because you didn't plan the foundation, strong enough to hold it. And strong doesn't necessarily mean more money. It means how thoughtfully have you considered scale. And so scale is kind of the name of the game in Silicon Valley. And how do you scale? And there are other parameters that matter, and some of them people forget about, like profitability. People want to scale and continue losing money, and then you end up with things like WeWork or Uber, which they can't even figure out how it's going to make a profit, and so it's raised a lot of investment and a lot of scale, but they're losing money billions of dollars a quarter, and they have no plan even of how it would not lose money. And so investors will invest in that to get scale under the assumption that they can figure out how it'll make money later. But at a certain point, after a decade of losing money, then investors will say, I'm tired of that, and look for something else. So it scaling at the cost of everything else isn't necessarily the best long-term strategy.
Yes, exactly. It can only go on for so long in the startup world, but once you've gone on for a while, what's your take on, so one of the things that I got really interested in myself when I started paying attention a little bit more to the Vision Fund. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Vision Fund, which is the $100 billion fund. I don't know if supposedly he's raising another $100 billion. That's what's his name from SoftBank. What's his name? He was actually
Masayoshi-san. Masayoshi-san.
Okay, so Masayoshi, I was blown away when I didn't know about him. I had no idea. I didn't know that he also for, I think one day was the richest man in the world. So he had top Bill Gates, right before the dot-com crash, and then he lost everything. Okay, so I couldn't even believe that either. Everything was gone, and he had to rebuild from scratch. And now he's actually back at it again. A lot of people, the reason I bring this up is because, SoftBank is invested heavily in WeWork, as you were just mentioning. And I think their CEO just had to step down. I don't know the reasons behind it. But what's your take with what the Vision Fund is doing? For those of you that don't know the Vision Fund, they're ridiculously investing into AI. I would love to get your take, because this is the biggest venture capital, investment fund in the world, right? It's the biggest the Vision Fund is.
Well, all in one fund. I mean, SoftBank is a Japanese company that is investing in Silicon Valley, and the Vision Fund is a $100 billion fund. About half the money comes from Saudi Arabia and places like that, and so it's Middle East money being run by Japanese to invest in Silicon Valley with an extra zero added to each thing they do, and so by having a larger fund like that, they can take bigger bets, and so if the bet works out, they'll gain more. However, it's yet to be tested. If the bet doesn't work out, they lose a lot, and so SoftBank has been the lead investor in quite a few unicorn style, hyper growth, blitz scaling type companies. And WeWork is the recent example in the news these days, where WeWork has grown very rapidly, and through a series of private investments, where the most recent private investment valued the company at $47 billion, which is in the top 3 of private companies. Much smaller than some public companies, but still substantial. And in that company in particular, they don't know how it's going to make a profit. It basically subleases real estate. That's their business. And other people have done that before, and it's a tough business. And the difference is that they had a very charismatic CEO who was able to convince investors to invest huge amounts of money and say that, well, if we scale this globally, then we'll figure out how it'll make money. And they haven't figured that out. But and so they raised money from venture investors like SoftBank, and SoftBank was the largest investor and the lead. And they were willing to push the valuation up high in a superficial way. That and then they were filing WeWork to go public, which means selling its stock to the ordinary and general public investors, with analysts and investment bankers criticizing it and so forth. And when people started to look into it a little bit, they said, hey, the emperor's not wearing any clothes here. This company is not worth $47 billion. It's at best worth 10. And so SoftBank, right there lost 80% of the value of their investment, and they actually have pulled the IPO completely for now, for this year, because they can't get investor confidence or interest to even buy very much of it at 10.
Wow.
And so the thing is these unicorn valuations, though, like people like SoftBank are investing in something like WeWork, but they have liquidation preferences, and they have ratcheting. They have terms of their investment that if the value ever goes down, they automatically get more stock. And so their investment is actually protected, in that their high valuation that they're paying is the valuation of all the different kinds of stock. However, the investor stock is more protected than the founder stock. And so you can get a high valuation, but if anything goes a little bit wrong, the people who take the biggest hit on that are the common shareholders and the founders and the team and the option holders and so forth, where the investors have protections. And so in the case of something falling apart like WeWork, it would trigger some of these liquidation preference and raft preference. And so whatever money was left over would go to the investors, and the founders and team would get nothing.
Wow.
And so so being a unicorn may look good, but it may not actually be a blessing unless everything goes absolutely perfectly, and it rarely goes perfectly.
Yeah. And basically, like, one of the things is like, the bigger the reward, the bigger the risk, right?
Right.
Unicorn type of advancement, unicorn type of risk, right? Which could be highly. Do you know what the odds are, like, getting into unicorn range? Like, how often do companies, are they successful compared to that they're not? Because I know, like, under that, it's like phenomenally high.
Well, I would. So a unicorn is a term that's become popular in the last 10 years, and it's not necessarily a good thing. Like, people view that as something they want to have. But if you think about it from the like the failure rate of Y Combinator, for example, is 93%, and the failure rate of the average startup companies, is much higher than that. So that means, at best, you have a 1 out of 10 chance of not failing, of succeeding. And for a portfolio, it's really about 1 out of 20 companies will succeed from the investor's point of view. So from a investor point of view, you don't want to invest in only one company. Not even 10 companies isn't good enough. You have to invest in 20 or more before you get exposure to that one that'll be successful, that pays for the losses in the other 19. And so from an investor point of view, well, that's just the strategy of running a venture portfolio and a portfolio of investments. And that's the way the game is played. But from an entrepreneur point of view, if you're one of those companies, odds are you're going to be one of the 19 and not the one that succeeds. And so a portfolio strategy from the entrepreneur point of view is super risky. And the investor's a little bit more relaxed because they're diversified. But for it to work, the entrepreneur has to be a true believer in the mission of what they're doing, and enough to convince the investor that it's worth backing. And the thing about raising investment is it's basically a practice version of selling the company, because you're selling a piece of the company to an investor as opposed to selling the whole company to an investor or an acquiring company. So it's a little bit setting your intention that as soon as you have investors, they care about one thing most importantly, which is, how do I get my money back? And so they're thinking every phone call every day is, well, this is all nice, this business, but how is it going to get a return on the investment? And they're looking at the statistical likelihood of the different ways that that's going to happen and when it's going to happen and so forth. And so some people want to quick flip their investments and, invest and then get liquidity quickly with a small return. And that usually gets a bunch of small returns and a small overall result, as opposed to very strategically scrutinizing what you want to invest in and betting on that. And if it's going well, bet more and more and more on that for a long time. And that's where you get the 1000x returns as opposed to the 10% returns. And so that's the interesting game as I see it.
Yeah, that is the interesting part right there, 100%. So, what's really cool about this, coming in more into the investment space and learning more about, venture capital, angel investments, and meeting so many different people and so many entrepreneurs that need the help. One of the things that we figured out, and I think you've done a really good job of figuring this out too, is that a lot of entrepreneurs or startups don't even know what they're doing or what they're getting themselves into. So a lot of times that these entrepreneurs are on their mission. They have great ideas. Some of them are geniuses. Some of them are innovators. They have great ideas. But they have no idea how to run a company, how to build teams, how to even sometimes raise money properly. So one of the reasons that we created, the Pitch Mastermind is to give people some of that knowledge and information. Having someone like yourself that has a vast experience to understand this stuff is amazing. And that's one thing that I see happening in the world is that all these entrepreneurs, they're getting accessibility, due to the digital spectrum, the network effect, some of these platforms like Pitch that's coming on board, but they're not ready. So it's like the gap needs to be bridged, right? So the gap needs to be basically come together to help them understand this stuff so the success rates can go up a little bit more. It's potentially that they can help a little bit more and can bridge the gap, but we're still probably going to have a lot of companies that end up failing, but it's a good learning experience, right? Okay, so with that being said, Reese, give us a take, give us a last little synopsis for the entrepreneurs, for the investors, for the people out there that are looking to do something big in the world. And what would you say if you had just one sentence or at least some last words for them on their mission? What is one piece of information that you can give them now that can help them take them into the future? And you're a very aligned character and you're doing huge things. What has helped you take you to the place that you're at right now? And can you share that with our audience, Reese?
Well, I think it's important to remind yourself of what problem are you solving, and is that a problem at scale, like a billion people scale problem? And then are you using the right kind of technology to solve that problem? Like Amazon started selling books and people were selling books before that. They didn't, they just did it a slightly different way, but had a theoretical concept that scaled to the size of the Amazon. And so that's the name. And so that they were thinking at a big scale, even though they started simply, selling books by mail. And so that's something that, as opposed to, I'm going to have a bookstore on this corner and we're going to have, some books in the window and some books on bookshelves and people will love it. And that's both of them are selling books, but one of them is designed to scale, the other not so much. And so that kind of thinking, and then you're building two products. You're building the product that the customers of the business buy, but then you're building a business that is a product. And who's going to invest in that product? Who's going to buy that product? What's the sales and marketing of that product? How do you ensure that it's good quality? How do you debug problems? And nobody's born knowing how to do any of these things. That you learn by mentorship, and you learn by meeting other people who, like I've made 1,000 different mistakes, and I can tell you how to avoid all of those. But people are creative. They invent new mistakes that haven't been done before. And so part of it is avoiding, classic mistakes but the other is being willing to make some mistakes and being adjusting, just like, sailing in a windstorm. You have to adjust to the wind and the waves, and so when you're running a company, it's kind of similar, that you can have a plan, but if there's a big wave, you got to go around it, and that so business is similar in that sort of dynamic adaptability, and then just that nobody should be expected to do it by themselves. That's the whole point of having friends and mentors and co-founders and investors, and so a little bit what these gatherings are useful for is to meet people who've done different kinds of things and learn from their wisdom and their mistakes, and then share your kind of concepts where entrepreneurs are often like secretive about or paranoid about their concept, and
it's a good one here.
And so if you share it before you spend a lot of money to do it, people will say, well, that's not going to work because of some obvious thing, as opposed to, let's keep it secret and do it, and then the obvious thing happens in a very public way. And so it's better to kind of test run ideas and concepts with people who have been there before and done that, and they're not going to, the paranoia about keeping your idea secret is a pretty sure sign that it's not going to work. Generally.
Oh man, I love that. One of the biggest questions that we literally get at Pitch Investors Live, and I've actually had people also wanting to go to the mastermind, and then they're like, you know what? Is everyone going to sign NDAs? I can't share my idea. Can I talk to people privately? I'm like, look, very similar to what you said. I'm like, look, if you don't share this with people, how are you going to get the proper feedback? Like, if you're really passionate and inspired by what you're doing, they may want to join you, and you're not allowing that opportunity to come into place. You're going to keep it into yourself, and it's never going to get anywhere. So I know what you said about that. And yeah.
Well, and very often people turn to lawyers as advisors in the early stages, and the lawyers are happy to charge you by the hour for anything. And so, for example, patents, the lawyers will say, well, you need to have patents for what you're doing, and we'll charge you money for each patent that we file. And they don't mention that, well, more than 90% of patents are worth exactly $0. And so people spend a lot of money writing up and filing all those patents, but to protect their idea, but maybe the idea is not worth anything and the patent is worth even less. And you burned all your early capital protecting an idea that you haven't even proven that anybody cares about. And so there's a big advantage of starting with test customers and seeing if you're really solving the problem, and if it's an idea that requires technology, well, can you solve that problem manually in a way that makes the person happy, and then you spend the money to develop the technology to solve the problem, and so it's a little bit of a reality check that a gathering of people can share their ideas, and it's much more likely, probabilistically, that you'll get feedback that makes your idea better than somebody will take your idea and steal it.
Yeah, no, oh man, I love that advice right there. Guys, this is Reese Jones. He's going to be at the mastermind, where we're going to have a very intimate environment. It's going to be a mastermind. I don't know if I told you already, Reese, but we ended up upgrading our event it's called the Diana Resort or Hotel. And we're actually doing this inside of a huge penthouse. We got very lucky because our last place had a little bit of an issue. So we got it upgraded into the largest penthouse in North America. So not only are we bringing all these thought leaders like yourself, Grant Cardone is coming in, Kevin Harrington, Reese Jones, yourself, obviously, Laurel Langmeyer, James Carey, another venture capitalist, Gayatri. I know you've met her like once through like the phone, but she's going to be there. She's actually very excited to meet you too. And we're having a lot of these elite entrepreneurs. And one of the things that you said that rings so true and has been very beneficial to me is that you get to bounce ideas off people and people that have been there, and your idea sometimes will completely shift by the time you're gone, going in a direction that just saved you 6 months to a year potentially, and like you said, potentially a lot of money saved of not going in the wrong direction. So we're super excited to have you there. Can't wait to see you October 18th, 19th, and 20th. I'm very excited to have you speak in the knowledge that you're going to pour out to all these people. So we're very thankful for this. You just dropped so many knowledge bombs. It wasn't even crazy. So you guys just got a treat. Thanks, Reese. We appreciate you so much. We'll be seeing you soon. And I thank you for everything that you do. And we continue to hope to see you innovate way into the future.
Great. I look forward to seeing you.
Yep. Look forward to it, Reese. And thanks, everyone. Reach out to us if you need anything or have some